Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Today we will be learning Parshat Eikev. And the first verse of Parshat Eikev is V'haya Eikev tishma'un et mishpatim ha'ela u'shmartem v'yasitem otam v'shamar Hashem Elokecha lecha et habrit v'et hachesed asher nishba la'avotecha. We're going to be really looking at one word, Eikev. That's the name of the parsha. It appears in this first verse, and it's actually very hard to translate because when it appears in different places, it has different meanings according to the context. Here, I'm just going to read the art scroll. It says, "This shall be the reward when you listen to the ordinances, to these ordinances, and you guard them and you do them, that God will guard you and the covenant and the loving kindness that he promised to your forefathers." That is the opening verse. So there are many explanations. This word Eikev, some people translate it as because. And it will be because you listen to these ordinances and you do them, that God will, in kind, will guard the covenant and give you chesed like he promised to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Other people translate it as when you listen, then this will be the reward. As I said, in other places, it's even harder to translate this word. So let's see what Rashi says. So Rashi says, he brings a real drasha here, because the word Eikev, and that's what we're going to be investigating, Eikev also means heel, the heel of the foot, the heel of the body. And we'll explain that in greater detail. But Rashi brings from the Midrash, so there are many other words for when or because other than Eikev. It's not, it's calling out to be interpreted. So Rashi says, Ima mitzvot kalot adam dash be'ekav tishma'un. So when will you get this reward that God will guard the covenant and he will remember the kindnesses and give them to you as he promised the patriarchs and the matriarchs? So Rashi says, when will that happen? When you guard and observe those mitzvot that you might consider light mitzvot, kalot, like not so substantial mitzvot. If you guard even those, then God will reward you. And he makes a play on the words with the word Eikev, that these kind of mitzvot we might think are not so important, and therefore we, as it were, step on them with our heel, meaning we just kind of take them for granted. We walk over them as if they're not important. So Rashi brings this drasha to explain that's when you will be rewarded. That it's not only what you might think are the important mitzvot, even the so-called less important, the easy mitzvot that you might trample with your foot. So that's what Rashi says. The Baal HaTurim brings a number of different explanations of this word. Again, we have to emphasize that there are many other words that could be used other than Eikev. Eikev is not the usual word that we might expect. So the Balatorium says this word Eikev, its gematria is 172. What's the importance of 172? The Balatorium says that the 10 Commandments have 172 words in them. And we know that the 10 Commandments, in a sense, are representative of all of the mitzvot. Excuse me. So the Balatorium says, very different than Rashi. Rashi is saying that these are mitzvot that you might trample over because you might not think important. Here is almost the opposite explanation, is if you keep the 10 Commandments and all of the mitzvot that are connected through those 10 Commandments, then God will bless you. So you have almost a different opposite explanation than Rashi. Here, the Balatorium is alluding to the very important 10 Commandments. Then he brings another explanation from the Psalms, 19:12, where it says, Bishamram Eikev Rav. If you guard them, meaning the mitzvot, again, here Eikev is used as a reward. The reward will be Rav, which means very great. So he brings this and he says, but the word Rav is connected to another verse in the Psalms. It says, Ma Rav Tuvcha Asher Tzefanta L'Reacha. How great will be the goodness that is hidden away by God for those who have awe and respect and honor for him. So he brings the connection of the word Rav. But here we start with the idea of Bishamram Eikev Rav. Excuse me. When we keep the mitzvot, the reward will be very great. So here, the Balatorium is using the word Eikev very similar to the art scroll in the context of a reward that will be paid to you. The Balatorium goes on with another explanation. And he says, if you take the letters of Eikev, Ayin, Kuf, Bet, and you permute them differently, it spells the word Keva, Kuf, Bet, Ayin. Keva means something steady, something ongoing, something set, orderly. And this word is used in the idea of setting times to learn Torah. And in fact, we're told that when we go to heaven, one of the first questions that they'll ask us is, did you set time? Did you make time on a daily basis to learn Torah? Keva. So he says that when it says, when your reward will be when you hear and observe these ordinances, these mitzvot. Well, one of the mitzvot is to learn Torah. So the Balatorium is, again, a very beautiful linguistic drasha on the word Eikev, means also with the letters permuted, Keva, ongoing commitment to learn Torah on a daily level. Then he brings even one more explanation. As I said in the beginning, this word is calling out for deep understanding. So the last one, he points to the idea that one of the meaning of the word Eikev is heel, the heel of the foot. So he says that when you listen to the commandments and you do them humbly, because a state of humbleness is alluded to by the heel. The heel is the bottom of the foot. It's the lowest part of the body, and we walk on it. So that symbolizes the idea of being humble. Not that we should let people walk all over us. That's not really a positive type of humbleness, but still the part of the body that the heel is alludes to having a low spirit, an existential lowliness, which is called shiflut. So that was the Balaturim. Now, there are a number of, there are two references of this word with Avram Avinu. And we know that in essence, everything goes back to Avram Avinu. For those who have the book, one was Avraham. That's the point of the whole book. Everything starts with Avraham. So in the 22nd chapter of Bereshit, the 18th verse, it says like this. This is a blessing after the Akedah, after Avram brings Yitzchak for an offering, and of course God tells him not to do it, it was a test. Then he gets all of these blessings, and it says, "V'hit barchu b'zarecha kol goyei ha'oretz, Eikev asher shemata b'koli." And through you and your descendants, all of the nations of the world will be blessed. And here Eikev means because you listened to my voice. God is saying, I commanded you to bring Yitzchak as an offering, and you listened to me. In the end, God reveals it was a test. But here, Eikev means because. Now, I want to point out right here in the opening verse of Eikev, we said that God would guard the covenant and the chesed that he had promised to the Avot. But this is specifically to Avram. Avram is the first one who is commanded with the covenant of circumcision. And the main personality trait of Avram is chesed. So here, it's the Eikev in our parsha is alluding to Avram Avinu, especially the idea of God guarding the covenant and his chesed. And if you look in Parshat Eikev, a number of times God says through Moshe, I am giving you this land in order to fulfill my love and my promise and my choosing Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It says it a number of times for those who read through the whole Parsha. It's not the only time. Other times in the Torah, the same idea is given over. The idea that, and actually it says in our Parsha, because God loved Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, therefore all of their descendants are blessed because of them. So here we see the word Eikev with Avram Avinu. And then a second time in chapter 26, the 5th verse. Well, actually read the 4th and the 5th. This is God blessing Yitzchak. And it says, "V'hir beiti et zaracha kekochavei hashemayim." I have, or I will increase your descendants like the stars of heaven. V'natati lezarecha et kol ha'artzot ha'el. And I'm giving to your descendants all of these lands. V'hitparchu b'zarecha kol goyei ha'oretz. And through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. So that sounds very much like the blessing that Avram gets. As we said, really everything goes back to Avram. And then the next verse starts with, Eikev asher shema Avraham bekoli. V'yishma mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'toratai. Because Avram listened to my voice and he guarded my ordinances, my mitzvot, my decrees, and my Torah. Again, the word Eikev is going back to Avram Avinu. And like I said, in the whole parsha of Eikev, it makes this point over and over again, that it's because God loved and chose and blessed the patriarchs and the matriarchs. That is why the people of Israel have the right to the land of Israel. But what's interesting, I'm just pointing out, we have discussed before this idea that the sages said that Avram, especially Avram, but all of the patriarchs and matriarchs kept the Torah even before it was given. And it's explained that it doesn't mean exactly every detail of halakha as we have it today, but spiritually and in concept, they were already keeping the mitzvah. And this verse, this is really the source of this idea, because it says, because God guarded my ordinances, my mitzvot, my decrees, and my Torah. So it says it actually, it says it explicitly. So here we bring it back to Avram, but there's another incredible drasha that's given with the word Eikev with Avram Avinu. And that is, Avram Avinu lived to be 175. We already mentioned that the gematria of Eikev is 172. And here, in both of these verses, it says, because Avram listened to my voice. So the drasha is, and the question is, when did Avram come to the realization that there was one God? So there are different midrashim as to how Avram came to understand that there was only one God. And the process that he went through, the intellectual process that Avram went through in order to come to that conclusion. One of the midrashim say already at the age of 3, Avram began to understand that there is really only one God. Remember, Avram is living at a time of idol worship everywhere. And according to the Midrash, his own father sold idols. One of the Midrashim says from the age of 3. So according to that Midrash, others, he was substantially older, 40 or 48, in that range. But here, according to the Midrash, that he was 3 and he already had an awareness of God. And as it were, he was listening to God. So that's the drasha. Since Avram died at the age of 175, and the word Eikev that we learned in the verses about Avram equals 172, well, there's 3 missing. 172 from 175 equals 3. So starting at the age of 3, that's what it says, because Eikev, Avram listened to my voice. So at age 3, he was already connected to the one God. So that's a beautiful explanation. Now we have this idea that the first time a word is introduced in the Torah, it has great significance. So the first time the word Eikev, and now from this point on, we are going to be concentrating on the word Eikev, meaning heel. And as we will see, there's many connections to the idea of heel. And that's why Rashi, when he could have made an easier explanation that Eikev means when or because. But he gives this drasha that the type of easy mitzvot that a person might step over. And if you listen to those, then God will respond in kind. But where is the first time that the word Eikev is used in the Torah? So that's by the snake. After Adam and Chava eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and God gave Adam and Chava a chance to do tshuva, but Adam blamed Chava and Chava blamed the snake instead of taking responsibility for themselves. So after that, the consequences were what we might call curses. So Adam had a certain curse that the land would be cursed because of Adam eating from the tree, and he'd have to work like really hard to make a living. And Chava was, as it were, cursed to have pain in childbirth. And the snake was also cursed. And the verse says, this is third chapter of Genesis, Bereshit, the 15th verse. So it says, "Ve'eva ashit beincha ubein isha." God is speaking to the snake. There will be contention between you and between Eve, the woman. Ubein zaracha ubein zara, and your descendants, meaning the descendants of the snake, and her descendants. Hu yishufcha rosh, the descendants of Chava will step on your head, and you will bite their heel. That's what it says. That the mankind, as it were, would want to, because the snake represents the evil inclination. And so hopefully we'll be able to, as it were, step on the head of the snake and to keep it from biting us. But if we're not careful, the snake will bite us. So that's the first place that it appears. So this brings in a whole other explanation here. And here we'll bring in the expression that what's called the footsteps of the Mashiach, which is symbolic of when history gets to the point when the signs of Mashiach become clearer and clearer. These are the times that we're living through right now. We've mentioned this so many times, how so many of the prophecies that were prophesied by all of the great prophets of Israel are coming true before our very eyes. So this is called Ikvata de Mashiach. And usually in English, we say the footsteps of the Mashiach. But literally, Ikvata is the heel, meaning the footstep, but a footstep is on the heel. That's the sole of the foot. And so the expression for call it the birth pangs, or the time that is bringing the Mashiach close, is called the heel of the Mashiach. Now, here we see that the first mention of this word Eikev is by the snake, but we know that the numerical value, the gematria of Nachash, is exactly the same as Mashiach. And here we see in the curse to the snake, God says the descendants of Adam and Chava will step on your head, but you will be able to bite their heel. But here we see, because the gematria of Mashiach and the snake are the same, here we see symbolically, it will be the Mashiach that will be able to not only step on the head of the snake, but to, in a sense, to kill the snake, or to transform the energy of the snake into energy of good. And this is connected to an expression in the Talmud that says, like, oi to the snake. If you wouldn't have used your sneakiness, your crookedness, you could have been the best friend of mankind. And this is alluding to the idea that the snake, in a positive sense, is passion. When passion goes in the wrong direction for the wrong reasons, then it becomes lust. And that's the headquarters of the snake, of the Yetzer Hara. But when this energy is directed, then it becomes passion. And that passion can be directed for very, very holy things. So now we'll add that the idea of calling the time before Mashiach, the footprints of the Mashiach, the heel of the Mashiach, is connected to the heel of history. We know that we have a tradition that this cycle of history, will last 6,000 years. We are now in 5784. We are getting very close to the year 6000. So this time of history is called the heel of history. It's the end of history. And that's why we can understand the return of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel these last 140 years approximately, even though there was always a Jewish presence through all the generations. There was never a time, from the time of, once we came back after the 40 years in the desert, there's never been a time that there wasn't a Jewish presence, even with all the exiles. But right now is like the heel of history. And that's why we have this expression, Ikvata de Mashiach. At the end of the cycle of history, that's when Mashiach will come, even though we know that it could be brought sooner. In theory, Mashiach could have come last year or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But it didn't happen. And so now we see all of the signs that the prophets told us would happen before the Mashiach comes. So returning to the Nachash, we know that in the whole story of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, there's a lot of sexual innuendos. That's what we said, that the Nachash, symbolically in many cultures, represents the sexual energy. And this is in Judaism also. And in the Midrashim, which we're not going to go into right now, there is a lot of, as I said, sexual innuendos with the snake and Chava and this pre-Chava energy called Lilith. One would have to go through all of the Midrashim. And so it's brought down that there's a Midrash that Adam was created, put into the Garden of Eden, ate from the tree, all within a 12-hour period. And here we won't comment, is it the hour that we have? But, and this midrash goes through that in the first hour, this happened. In the second hour, that happened. The third hour. In the 9th hour of a 12-hour day, which means 3/4 through the day, Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra. If you look at where we are in history right now, we're at 5784, meaning we're 3/4 through the 6th millennium. And the 6,000 years of history, each 1,000 years can be compared to a 12-hour day. So we're 3/4 through, we'll call it the 9th hour of the 6th millennium. And this, many rabbis have noticed this and taught about this, that there's a parallel between Adam and Chava eating from the tree in the 9th hour of their day and the sexual revolution that happened in our generation, and also the sexual confusion that is happening. Revolution here is not necessarily good. That right now there's, I'm not going to go into this right now, but there's really mass confusion in the world over sexual identity. And this parallels exactly when Adam and Chava ate from the tree. This is all connected to the heel, to the consequence of what the snake did and what Adam and Chava did. It's also a sign of the heel of the year. Parshat Eikev always comes before Parshat Re'eh. Parshat Re'eh is the next Parsha. And during Parshat Re'eh is always Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul signifies we're getting towards the end of the year. It's time to put our accounting in order. And Eikev, remember, means heel, and the idea of footprints, like the footprints of Mashiach. You can hear the Mashiach coming, but also Parshat Eikev, you can start to hear that the year is coming to its end. You can hear it's in the air. And this is connected very much to tonight is Tu B'Av. And we're told that one of the reasons connected to Tu B'Av is the wood for the altar in the temple. It was considered a tremendous honor to bring wood that would be used on the altar in the temple. That the wood could only be cut until Tu B'Av, but not after. You couldn't bring wood that was cut after Tu B'Av to the altar. You could bring from a previous year, but if it was cut in the same year, it had to be before Tu B'Av, because the sun begins to recede after Tu B'Av. In other words, the vast majority of the summer and the heat has already happened by Tu B'Av. So we're at the heel of history. We're also at the heel of the year. Parshat Eikev is hinting that we're coming to the end of the year. We'll put in one more idea here, and that is another place where the word Eikev plays a very, very important part. Is Yaakov is named because he was holding on to the heel of Esau when they came out of the womb. So his name, Yaakov, is basically Yud and the word Ekev. Yud means hand. His hand was holding on to the heel of Esau. Now, of course, this could be an entire class to discuss the deep symbology of Yaakov's name being that he was holding on to the heel of Yaakov. But I'm just going to mention here that of all the portions of the Torah, the one that has the most descriptions of the land of Israel is this parsha. And we, just from a lack of time, I'm not going to read to you, but if you go through Parshat Eikev, you'll see some of the most beautiful and descriptive pictures of the land of Israel. Moshe is giving this over to the people who are about to enter into the land. So there's this idea that the letter Yud it's the smallest of the letters, and it's called the little that holds a lot. So it's a very deep connection that this parsha is called Ekev. One of the Avot, one of the patriarchs, is called Yaakov, and he is blessed when he has the dream of the ladder. So afterwards, God says, you will spread out to all four of the directions. You will inherit and you will spread out. And if you look at the last few lines of this parsha, it says, and the whole parsha is this idea, if you listen to God, you observe the mitzvot. Observing the mitzvot means that you build a just, kind, orderly society. Then it says, everywhere that you put your foot, you will be able to conquer. And there God gives the large borders of Eretz Yisrael, from the Nahar Parat, which is the Euphrates, to the brook, to the final sea. In other words, the idea that in the future, when Mashiach comes, the land of Israel will spread to the entire world. But in this parsha, it says, everywhere you'll put your foot. There it uses a different, it doesn't say Ekev, but it's the same meaning. So the parsha begins with the idea of the heel, and it ends. So Yaakov, he's holding on to the heel. The heel is a small part of the body. But Yaakov, by holding on, will merit that his descendants will be able to spread, in a sense, to the whole world. And Eretz Yisrael, everyone knows, when you look on a map, you can hardly see it. It is so small. And yet in Eretz Yisrael, we have everything. And it's explained in this parsha. As I've said many times, a lot of what I'm trying to give over, I've already given over in Orchard of Delights and Fruits of the Orchard. And there is that this land, which is so small, has everything from snow-capped mountains to the lowest place on earth, the Dead Sea, has dolphins and coral reefs by a lot, has the largest natural crater in the world in Mitzpe Ramon, has desert, has mountains, has streams, has lakes, has everything in miniature. That's the Yud of Yaakov. And that's alluded to. The Eikev is a small part of the body, but how could we walk without the Eikev? That is our way of transporting ourselves. Okay, that is our first insight. Now we have another insight, and that is coming from a verse later in the Parsha. That says, Moshe says to the people, and this is the third Parsha that Moshe is going back over what happened at Har Sinai. The experience of Har Sinai is so important. Moshe is going over it, and each time there's a different aspect, a different perspective that is revealed. So here in this Parsha, he reveals something that is not revealed anyplace else. And it says, V'yet chatatchem asher asitem et ha'egel. So he's reminding them of the sin they did with making this golden calf. Lakachti v'asrofoto. I took this golden calf and I burned it. Ba'esh, in fire. Ve'evototo tachun hetev. And I ground it up very finely. Tachun hetev. Adasher dak, until dak la'afar. It was as fine as dust. V'ashlich et afaro ela nachal hayored minahar, and I threw it in the stream that came down from Mount Sinai. And then in a different parsha, it talks about how God made them drink from the dust of the Egel Zahav that he had thrown in the water. Then the waters were gathered, and he made the people drink. So first of all, we have to point out that with all of the explanations of Har Sinai in many different parshas, it's never mentioned a stream coming down from the mountain. This is the only place. And it doesn't elaborate. It just states it as fact. There was a stream coming down from the mountain. Moshe mixed that water with this dust from the golden calf, and he made the people drink. So this reminds us of something very similar. When else do we take something and throw it into a body of water? Well, that's tashlich. That is this very beloved custom that we do on Rosh Hashanah, where after a whole day of davening, we have our meal, we go to a body of water, preferably a flowing stream, and we symbolically cast our sins into the water. Where do we learn that from? Where does this custom come from? For those who have the book Seasons of the Soul, I write extensively about this custom. It's such a deep, meaningful custom. But literally, the idea comes from We know that in the Torah there are 13 midot of rachamim, 13 expressions of compassion, 13 attributes of compassion that was revealed to Moshe by God after the sin of the golden calf. There is another parallel 13 midot of rachamim in the book of Micha. In the book of Micha, there are also 13 midot of rachamim. They're worded very differently, but they're very, very connected. And in it, it says, I won't read the whole thing just to save time, but it says, "B'tashlich b'mitzolot yam kol chatatam." They will take all of their sins and cast them into the sea, into a body of water, and God will forgive them. So that's where the word tashlich comes. It literally means to throw, to cast away one's sins. So the question could be asked, these two actions are very similar. One is Moshe, it says literally that he threw the dust of this finely ground golden calf and mixed it with water and made the people drink, and casting away the sins. But there's a difference. In one sense, they sound very similar, but there is a difference. And that is, by Moshe, that whole story is he throws it in the water and then they drink it, which is symbolic of integrating. In fact, the Midrash says that the purpose of drinking, first of all, he wanted everyone to integrate the horrible sin that had just happened of worshiping a golden calf. But we know that not everyone participated. And so the Midrash says that when they drank from it, it clarified who sinned and who didn't sin, who was involved and who wasn't involved. That those who weren't involved, it didn't affect them. Those who were involved, it affected them greatly. So that's the difference. Here, the throwing into the water is more and the drinking of it is the idea of integrating the sin that had happened. And in the process of tshuva, it's a process. It just doesn't, like the light bulb doesn't go off. We do tshuva, and that's the end of the story. It's usually a process of understanding, well, what a person has to understand, what they did wrong, why they did it, how are they going to fix it, and what steps are they going to take practically to make sure it doesn't happen again. It's a process. So the concept of drinking is integration. Tashlich is once you've integrated, then you can very symbolically throw away your sins. You've gone through a maturing process that you know how to fix it, how to do tshuva. And therefore, and again, it's happening on Rosh Hashanah. When we begin 10 days of tshuva, we actually began in the beginning of Elul, but it becomes intensified between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So the casting away of the sins, of course, is symbolic of a person's commitment to change, to do tshuva. But now I want to point out a paradox here. Is the word for the stream is nachal. Nachal means a stream. The word for an inheritance, it's used over and over in the Torah. Over and over in Torah. In this parsha also, But in other parshas, it's used continually. The idea of having an inheritance in Eretz Yisrael is called the nachala. It's the same word as nachal, but it has a hey at the end. A nachala, that's one's inheritance. So what's the paradox? A nachal is a flowing stream. It's different than, let's say, a lake or a sea or an ocean, which, okay, an ocean has waves. A lake might have a river coming into it and a river going out of it. But when you're at the lake, of course, there are waves, but you don't see it flowing. That's the beauty of a stream or a river. You see the flow. So the paradox or seeming paradox is that the word of inheritance means permanence. The idea of having your inheritance in Eretz Yisrael and then giving it over to your children, or the bigger picture where God all the time uses the word nachala when he's talking to all of Am Yisrael, that you will come into the land and you will inherit it. It will become your nachala. So nachala has the meaning, the feeling of permanence. So it's something that we've pointed out many times, that sometimes a root in Hebrew can mean two opposite things, or here, excuse me, l'chaim, l'chaim. Or it could point to two different themes altogether, one flowing and one permanent. And yet when we look closer at Eretz Yisrael, the borders of Eretz Yisrael are always changing. They're not permanent. And in this parsha is the second passage of the Shema. The first passage, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. You shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That was in last week's parsha, along with the Shema. But the second passage that we say every morning and evening, we have three passages, is in this week's parsha, V'haya im shema, and it will be if you listen, which is very, very connected to the beginning of the parsha. V'haya Eikev tishma'un, and it will be the reward if you hear. And there it says very clearly, if you listen to the words of God and you observe the mitzvot, you will get rain in its season, and everything will be good. Then it says, but if you don't listen to the words of God, God will shut up the heavens, there will be no rain, and you will not be able to stay in the land. So we read this every day, twice in the Shema, and the point is so important that call it our right, our merit to Eretz Yisrael is dependent on our following the Torah. And we know from history how many times we've gone into exile and how many times the borders have changed. For those who have Orchard of Delight, if you look in Parshat Maseh, that's where we'll call it the small borders of Eretz Yisrael are delineated very clearly. Even though many of the places, the names of the places, we don't know until this day exactly where they were. But the borders were delineated. And yet we know that David HaMelech conquered a much greater area, which was closer to the promise that is at the end of this parsha, which we'll call the borders of Avram Avinu, that God promised him from the Euphrates to, some people think it's the Nile, other people think it's in the Sinai, the bigger borders, but they're throughout history. When we came back from Babylonia, the borders were not the same borders that Yehoshua had conquered when we came into the land. And the borders of Eretz Yisrael, which were given by the United Nations in 1947, were not the borders that we ended up with in 1948. In 1967, we got much expanded borders. Then we returned to Sinai. We returned Gaza. Didn't do us much good, but we returned Gaza. And we see, even today, the north of Israel it's like, it is part of Israel, but 60 to 80,000 people have been in internal exile for close to 10 months. So we see the borders are fluid, like a nachal. That's my point here. Is at first we look at nachal as a stream is flowing, and inheritance is permanent. But here we see that the way that God has set it up, our right to Eretz Yisrael, it's more our merit. We always have the right. It's God-given. But the merit to live in Eretz Yisrael, we have to earn. We have to deserve. And so here we see that they're both fluid in a way, but there's something fluid about the permanence also. This is called inter-inclusion. In the permanence, there's also a flow, and that is that the love of Eretz Yisrael, that the tradition that we will return to Eretz Yisrael, no matter how many times we go into exile, that flows from generation to generation. And so that's like inter-inclusion, that the idea of a nachala, of an inheritance, has a permanence to it. In Jewish consciousness, Eretz Yisrael is always ours. It's always our homeland, whether we're here or not. And that worked for 2,000 years. And each generation gave it over to the next generation, the hope and the promise and the prophecy that we would return to Eretz Yisrael and it would become our permanent nachala once again. So this is a very, very beautiful idea. I'll end with the tradition that, the ancient tradition that when a king was anointed, they were anointed by a stream. And the reason that the sages gave, why by a stream? To symbolize to the king that your kingship should flow to your children and your children's children and your children's children. And we see that the legitimate kingship has always been in the tribe of Yehuda through David HaMelech to Mashiach ben David. And so a king was anointed by a stream to symbolize that his kingship should flow from generation to generation. We'll end with just a beautiful hint that the word for king is melech. Melech equals 90. The word for water is mayim, also equals 90. So that's just a beautiful numerical gem of this tradition to anoint a king by water. We'll end with a blessing that our nachala in Eretz Yisrael should contain a permanence and a flowing. And the flow should be that when Mashiach comes, the sanctity, the holiness of Eretz Yisrael should spread to the entire world.